I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and until 2 weeks ago, I was living peacefully in the Victorian house my grandmother legally left to me. Everything changed when I returned early from a business trip to find my belongings scattered across the front lawn. Standing on my porch was my father, my stepmother Diane, and my pregnant stepsister Amber, acting like they owned the place. "We changed the locks. This is your sister's house now," Diane declared, handing the keys to Amber. "If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from and hit that subscribe button to see how I reclaimed what was rightfully mine." My story begins long before that shocking day on my front lawn. Growing up, I was incredibly close with my grandmother Eleanor. She was my rock, especially after my parents divorced when I was 15. My mother moved to California for a job, opportunity, and while we maintained a relationship through calls and summer visits, I chose to stay with my dad to finish high school with my friends and remain close to Grandma Eleanor. For 3 years, it was just Dad and me in our small apartment across town from Grandma's beautiful Victorian house. Those years weren't perfect, but we formed a solid bond as we both adjusted to our new normal. Dad worked long hours at his accounting firm, and I took care of most household chores while maintaining honor roll status. Everything changed when Dad met Diane at a company event. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and suddenly I had a stepsister, Amber, who was only a year younger than me. I genuinely tried to welcome them into our lives. I helped Dad plan a small engagement party, offered Amber advice about our high school, and even gave up my larger bedroom so they could convert it to a master suite while I took the smaller guest room. Looking back, I can see the red flags I missed in those early days. Diane would make comments about how fortunate I was to have my dad, subtly implying I should be more grateful for her presence in our lives. Amber would borrow my clothes without asking and return them damaged, if at all. When I mentioned these issues to Dad, he'd brush them off with, "They're still adjusting to their new life with us. Give them time." So I did. I gave them years of time, watching as my father gradually transformed from the man who'd taught me to stand up for myself into someone who agreed with everything Diane said. By the time I left for college, the tension in our house was constant but unspoken. Grandma Eleanor became my sanctuary during those years. Every Sunday, I'd spend the day at her Victorian house, helping with chores she could no longer easily manage, listening to stories about her youth, and learning her secret recipes. "This house has been in our family for 3 generations," she'd tell me while we baked her famous apple pie in the vintage kitchen. "Someday, it will be yours to care for." I never took that promise too seriously until my senior year of college when Grandma's health began to decline significantly. She was diagnosed with heart failure, and the doctors gave her 2 to 5 years with proper care. After graduation, I made the decision to move in with her. I found a job at a marketing firm in town that allowed me to work flexible hours, so I could take Grandma to her medical appointments. Dad and Diane visited occasionally, but those visits always left Grandma exhausted from Diane's intrusive questions about the house and family heirlooms. "Your stepmother asked if she could have my antique silver set," Grandma confided one evening after they left. "She said since I won't be using it much longer, she might as well start enjoying it now." I was furious, but Grandma just patted my hand. "Don't worry about it. I've made sure everything is properly arranged." 2 years later, Grandma Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep. The grief was overwhelming, but I found comfort in the memories we'd created in that house. The reading of the will took place in her lawyer's office 2 weeks after the funeral. Dad, Diane, and Amber attended, along with a few other relatives. Mr. Peterson, Grandma's lawyer for decades, was clear and direct. The Victorian house, along with most of her possessions, had been left to me. There was a modest financial bequest to my father and small keepsakes for other family members, but the house was mine free and clear. The tension in the room was immediate. "But that's the family home," Diane objected, looking at my father expectantly. Dad shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Mr. Peterson calmly explained that Eleanor had updated her will 3 years prior and had been of sound mind when making her decisions. As we left the office, Amber brushed past me in the hallway. "Must be nice to get everything handed to you," she muttered. Dad looked torn, but ultimately left with them without saying much to me. Over the next 2 years, I poured my heart, soul, and savings into maintaining the house. I had the electrical system updated, the plumbing fixed, and carefully restored several original features that had deteriorated with time. Each project felt like a continuation of my relationship with Grandma, honoring her by preserving the home she'd loved so much. My relationship with Dad, Diane, and Amber remained strained but cordial. We'd have occasional holiday gatherings where the conversation stayed superficial, and I'd noticed Diane eyeing the house's features with an expression I couldn't quite place. If I'd paid more attention, perhaps I would have seen what was coming. As the 2-year mark of inheriting the house approached, my career began taking off. I'd been promoted twice at the marketing firm and was starting to make a name for myself with several successful campaigns. The financial stability allowed me to tackle bigger renovation projects on the house, including restoring the wraparound porch that had been Grandma's favorite spot for summer evenings. During a rare family dinner at a local restaurant, Amber announced she was pregnant. 4 months along, she said, patting her slightly rounded belly while Diane beamed beside her. We're so excited to welcome the first grandchild to the family. I offered my congratulations, genuinely happy for her despite our complicated relationship. Dad looked proud, and for a brief moment, it felt like we might actually have a normal family dynamic. That illusion shattered when Diane turned the conversation toward my house. Now that you're doing so well with your career, Sarah, have you thought about your next steps? Maybe getting a condo downtown closer to your office? I was confused by the question. I'm happy where I am. The commute isn't bad, and I love the house. But it's so much space for just one person, Diane pressed, especially now with Amber expecting. Families should support each other during important life changes. The implication hung in the air, but I changed the subject. 2 weeks later, I received an exciting opportunity, an invitation to represent our firm at an international marketing conference in London. It would be a 2-week trip that could potentially lead to a significant promotion if I networked successfully. When I mentioned the trip at another family gathering, I noticed Diane and Amber exchanging glances. When exactly will you be gone? Diane asked, her tone seemingly casual. The first 2 weeks of April, I replied, feeling a strange uneasiness at her interest. That's a long time to leave the house empty, my father commented. Do you want me to check on it periodically? Something in his tone didn't sound quite right, but I brushed it off. Thanks, but Mrs. Benson next door already offered. She has my spare key for emergencies. Another exchange of glances between Diane and Amber. The week before my departure, Diane invited me to dinner, insisting it was to wish me well on my trip. Against my better judgment, I accepted. Throughout the meal, Diane kept steering the conversation toward my good fortune in life. You've been so blessed, Sarah. A beautiful home, a thriving career, no responsibilities tying you down. Don't you think it's time to share some of that good fortune with family? I remained polite but non-committal. After that dinner, my instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. I installed a security camera system the weekend before leaving, with notifications sent directly to my phone. I also asked Mrs. Benson to check the house daily and gave specific instructions not to let anyone inside, regardless of their relationship to me. Not even your father? She'd asked, surprised. Especially not my father or his family, I'd replied firmly. The first week of my trip went smoothly. The conference was informative, I was making valuable connections, and Mrs. Benson sent daily texts confirming all was well at the house. But midway through the second week, her messages became vague and then stopped altogether. I called several times, but only reached her voicemail. Worried, I called another neighbor who reported seeing Mrs. Benson leaving with a suitcase, mentioning something about an unexpected visit to her sister. By incredible luck, the final days of the conference were canceled when the main speaker fell ill. I managed to book an earlier flight home, arriving 3 days before I was expected back. The taxi dropped me off 2 blocks from my house at my request, a precaution prompted by my growing unease. As I turned the corner onto my street, I froze. Scattered across my front lawn were my belongings. Furniture, clothes, books, and personal items, some damaged from exposure to the elements. A moving truck sat in the driveway, and my father was carrying a box from it toward the house. Diane stood on the porch directing movers where to place Amber's furniture, while Amber herself sat in a lawn chair, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other holding a clipboard, apparently checking off items as they were moved in. I stood frozen for several moments, trying to process the scene before me. Part of me wondered if I was hallucinating from jet lag, but the cool spring breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass confirmed this nightmare was real. Taking a deep breath, I walked purposefully toward my house, stepping around my scattered possessions. Amber noticed me first, her eyes widening in alarm. "She's back!" she hissed loudly enough for Diane to turn. My father, emerging from the house, stopped dead in his tracks, a look of guilt flashing across his face before Diane stepped in front of him. "Sarah," Diane said with artificial sweetness, "we weren't expecting you until Saturday." The casual tone, as if they weren't in the process of stealing my home, made my blood boil. "Clearly," I replied, surveying the devastation of my belongings. "Would someone like to explain what's happening at my house?" Diane's expression hardened, the fake pleasantness evaporating instantly. "There's been a change of plans. This house is too big for just one person, especially with Amber's baby coming. We've decided this arrangement makes more sense for the family." The audacity struck me speechless momentarily. "You've decided? This is my house. Grandma left it. To me." I looked desperately at my father, waiting for him to step in, to say this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he cleared his throat nervously. "Honey, you have to understand. Amber needs stability right now. You have your career, your independence. You don't need all this space. It makes more sense for them to live here." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. "So you break into my house, throw my belongings on the lawn, change the locks? In what world is that legal or moral?" Diane stepped forward, keys dangling from her manicured fingers. "We changed. The locks. This is your sister's house now," she said coldly, handing the keys to Amber, who had waddled up to join them. "Your father agreed this is best for everyone." I turned to my father, searching for any sign of the man who had raised me. "Dad, you know this is wrong. This is breaking and entering, theft, and about a dozen other crimes." A flicker of doubt crossed his face, but Diane placed a hand on his arm. "Your father signed the ownership transfer papers as the eldest living relative. Eleanor would have wanted her great-grandchild to grow up in the family home." It was a blatant lie, and we all knew it. That's not how property law works, and you know it. Grandma left me this house in her will. It's legally mine. I took a step toward the front door, but Amber and Diane physically blocked my path. "Don't make this difficult, Sarah," Amber said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Think about the baby. Stress isn't good for either of us right now." I glanced around, noticing several neighbors watching the confrontation from their properties. Mrs. Chen from across the street had her phone out, possibly recording. No one intervened, but their presence at least provided witnesses. "I want to speak to my father. Alone," I demanded, struggling to maintain composure. Diane started to object, but Dad nodded, following me to the sidewalk where we could speak privately. The moment we were out of earshot, I turned to him. "Dad, what are you doing? This is illegal. You could go to jail for this." His eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Sarah, try to understand. Diane thinks this is best for everyone. Amber's boyfriend left. She has nowhere to go, and the baby deserves a good home." "And I deserve to have my home stolen? The home Grandma legally left to me? The home I've put thousands of dollars into maintaining?" I searched his face for any recognition of the wrong he was committing. "You've always been independent, capable. Amber needs help. It's not like you can't afford an apartment with your salary." The words stunned me. This man who had taught me about integrity and standing up for what's right was justifying theft because he thought I could handle being victimized better than Amber could handle finding appropriate housing, like a normal adult. "Dad, this is the last chance. Tell Diane and Amber to leave my house and return my key, or the next people coming here will be the police." Something shifted in his expression then, a hardening I'd seen increasingly since he married Diane. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Sarah, But this decision is final. Diane is right about what's best for this family now. In that moment, I realized I'd lost not just my home, but my father as well. He turned and walked back to Diane, who was watching our interaction intently. Their hushed conversation ended with both looking my way defiantly. "You should collect your things from the lawn," Diane called. "We've been generous enough to leave them for you, but the garbage collectors come tomorrow." The casual cruelty of the statement, delivered with my father standing complicitly beside her, was the final straw. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, with anger and heartbreak. "Enjoy the house while you can," I said, walking away before they could see me break down. I made it to the corner before the tears came, blurring my vision as I called my friend Lisa, who lived 15 minutes away. "Can I stay with you for a few days?" I asked when she answered, my voice cracking. Something's happened. Lisa's apartment became my sanctuary in the aftermath of that devastating confrontation. The first night I barely spoke, processing the shock of what had happened. My friend gave me space but stayed close, ordering takeout and making sure I ate something. "They can't just take your house," she said the next morning over coffee. "There must be legal protections." Her words penetrated the fog of betrayal and hurt, igniting a spark of determination. "You're right," I replied, opening my laptop. "Let's look at my options." We started by checking if the security cameras I'd installed had captured anything. Although Diane or my father had disconnected the indoor cameras, they'd missed the fact that the system backed up to cloud storage automatically. The footage clearly showed them entering with what appeared to be a locksmith, removing my personal items, and later bringing in Amber's belongings. "This is breaking and entering," Lisa said, watching the footage with me. "Clear as day." With renewed purpose, I called Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's lawyer who had handled her will. His secretary fit me in for an emergency appointment that afternoon. "I remember your case clearly," Mr. Peterson said after I explained the situation. "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes." He pulled out a file and spread several documents on his desk. "The house was left to you unconditionally. There's no legal mechanism for your father or stepmother to transfer ownership without your consent." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by anger at their blatant lies. "What can I do to get them out?" "First, let's look at the exact wording of your grandmother's will and the deed transfer," he said, adjusting his glasses to read through the documents. After several minutes, he looked up with a slight smile. "Ah, here it is, the small detail they overlooked." He turned the document toward me, pointing to a clause I hadn't noticed before. "Your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen. There's a specific anti-contestation clause here that states any attempt by family members to contest or circumvent the will results in them forfeiting any remaining inheritance and requires them to pay all legal fees associated with enforcing the will." Mr. Peterson continued explaining my options, from filing a police report for breaking and entering to seeking an emergency eviction order. We agreed on a multi-pronged approach. First, secure a temporary restraining order to prevent them from further damaging the property. Second, file criminal charges for breaking and entering. And third, prepare for civil action to cover damages to my property and legal fees. After leaving the lawyer's office, I went to the police station with the security footage. The officer taking my report was initially skeptical until he viewed the videos showing them breaking in and removing my belongings. "We can escort you to retrieve essential personal items," he offered after filing the report, "but the formal eviction will have to go through the courts." Next, I visited my bank to ensure my accounts were secure. Sure enough, there had been an attempt to access my savings account the previous day, supposedly for an emergency family need. Thankfully, the bank had denied the request due to missing proper identification. Back at Lisa's apartment, we created a comprehensive inventory of items visible in the security footage, estimated their value, and documented damage to furniture left on the lawn. Lisa helped me contact my boss to explain the situation and request a few days of emergency leave. To my surprise, he was incredibly supportive after hearing the circumstances. "Take the time you need," he assured me. "Family disputes like this are incredibly stressful." The most unexpected development came that evening when Amber's ex-boyfriend Tyler called me. Lisa had reached out to him through mutual connections. "I heard what they're doing," he said, sounding genuinely concerned. "It's not right, and there's something you should know." According to Tyler, Amber was closer to 6 months pregnant than 4, and contrary to what she'd told my father, Tyler hadn't abandoned her. "She broke up with me when Diane convinced her they could get your house. They've been planning this for months, waiting for you to be away long enough to move in." This information, while infuriating, provided valuable context for the legal case. The next day, Mr. Peterson filed for the temporary restraining order while I compiled all the evidence. After reviewing the security footage more thoroughly, I discovered clips showing Diane removing several valuable items from the house, including my grandmother's antique jewelry box that contained family heirlooms. A quick search on local online marketplaces revealed she had already listed some pieces for sale. We documented everything, creating an airtight case for court. I sent one final warning letter through Mr. Peterson, offering them 24 hours to vacate the property and return my belongings before facing legal consequences. The certified letter was delivered, signed for, and subsequently ignored. As difficult as the process was, each step helped transform my heartbreak into resolve. My home hadn't just been a house, it was my connection to Grandma Eleanor and the culmination of years of our shared memories. The thought of Diane and Amber erasing those memories by changing the house to suit their tastes fueled my determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. "We're ready," Mr. Peterson said after our final preparation meeting. "And Sarah, your grandmother would be proud of how you're handling this. She knew you had the strength to protect what she entrusted to you." Before proceeding with the full legal battle, Mr. Peterson suggested attempting one final mediation session. "It gives us the moral high ground," he explained, "and sometimes facing the reality of legal consequences makes people reconsider their actions." I agreed, though skeptical that Diane would listen to reason. We arranged for the meeting to take place at Mr. Peterson's office rather than my house, ensuring neutral territory. My father, Diane, and Amber arrived together, looking surprised to see Mr. Peterson present. I had requested that they bring their legal representation, but they arrived without counsel, Diane claiming confidently that they didn't need a lawyer for a family discussion. Mr. Peterson began by outlining my legal ownership of the property and the documented evidence of their unlawful entry and occupation. He displayed copies of my grandmother's will, the property deed in my name, and stills from the security footage showing them breaking in. I watched their expressions shift from confidence to uncertainty as the gravity of their legal situation became clearer. "These documents can be contested," Diane interrupted, her voice sharp. Eleanor was elderly and easily influenced. Sarah took advantage of her grandmother's diminished capacity to secure the house for herself. My father nodded beside her, though he avoided looking directly at me. "Your father has told us how you manipulated your grandmother against the rest of the family," Diane continued, "how you poisoned her against us so you could inherit everything." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "That's completely false, and you know it. Grandma made her own decisions about her property. She was mentally sharp until the very end, as her doctor can attest." "You barely let us visit her," my father said, finally speaking up. "Every time we came over, you made excuses about her being tired or not feeling well." "Because she was tired after your visits," I countered, especially when Diane spent the entire time asking about valuable items in the house instead of actually spending time with Grandma. Amber, who had been quiet until then, suddenly burst into tears. "I just need a stable home for my baby," she sobbed, hands protectively cradling her pregnant belly. "Is that too much to ask from family? A safe place for your niece or nephew to grow up?" The performance might have been convincing if I hadn't seen her laughing and taking selfies in my kitchen on the security footage just days earlier. Mr. Peterson gently steered the conversation back to legal realities. "Regardless of personal feelings, the facts are clear. The property legally belongs to Sarah. Your current occupation constitutes breaking and entering, and the removal and damage of her possessions qualify as theft and destruction of property." He slid a document across the table. "This is a formal notice to vacate the premises within 48 hours and return all removed items. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges and civil action." Diane didn't even glance at the papers. We've already spoken to several relatives who witnessed how Sarah isolated Eleanor. They're willing to testify that Eleanor wasn't in her right mind when making these arrangements. I noticed my father shifting uncomfortably at this claim. In a moment of clarity, I realized Diane had likely been spreading falsehoods throughout the extended family. "If you're referring to Aunt Martha and Uncle George," I said, "they visited Grandma regularly, often when I wasn't even home. They know exactly how mentally sharp she was." The slight widening of Diane's eyes confirmed my suspicion about her. Fabricated support. Mr. Peterson, ever professional, offered a potential compromise. If immediate housing for Amber is the concern, perhaps Sarah would be willing to assist in finding suitable accommodations. There are excellent programs for expectant mothers that provide temporary housing and support services. I nodded, willing to show good faith despite everything. I would help with a security deposit and first month's rent for an appropriate apartment. There's a nice complex near the hospital that has 2-bedroom units available immediately. For a moment, I thought I saw consideration in my father's expression, but Diane quickly squashed it. Absolutely not. The family home should go to the family member who's actually starting a family. Sarah doesn't need a 4-bedroom house for just herself. She gathered her purse and stood up. "We'll see you in court with our evidence of Sarah's manipulation. Come on, Richard," she said to my father. "We're done here." As they left, I noticed my father hesitate at the door, glancing back at me with an unreadable expression before Diane pulled him along. After they departed, Mr. Peterson sighed deeply. "They're making a serious mistake, but it's their choice. Based on their response, we'll proceed with the full legal action immediately." The failed mediation was disappointing, but clarifying. Any lingering hope that my father might come to his senses had been extinguished. As painful as it was, I now knew exactly where I stood and what I needed to do. "Let's move forward," I told Mr. Peterson, my resolve stronger than ever. "I want my house back." The days following the failed mediation brought new shocks and escalations. While waiting for our court date, I continued monitoring the security cameras that still had exterior views of the house. What I saw was heartbreaking. Diane and Amber had begun extensive renovations, tearing out the vintage banisters Grandma Eleanor had lovingly maintained and replacing the antique light fixtures with modern chandeliers. Through the windows, I could see they'd painted over the hand-stenciled floral borders in the dining room that Grandma and I had painstakingly restored together the summer before she passed. Each change felt like another wound, erasing my grandmother's presence from the home she'd cherished. My friend Lisa discovered Amber's social media posts showcasing her new home and the renovations we're making to prepare for baby's arrival. Photos displayed my furniture rearranged, my artwork replaced with their generic prints, and my grandmother's antique desk repurposed as a changing table. The comment section was filled with congratulations from people who had no idea the home had been stolen. Even more disturbing were the personal items visible in the background. My college diploma still in its frame, family photos with me awkwardly cropped out, and my collection of signed first edition books displayed as decorative objects. The most painful blow came when distant relatives began contacting me with confused and accusatory messages. "Your father told us you abandoned your grandmother in her final years and manipulated her into changing her will," wrote my cousin Jennifer. "How could you do that to sweet Aunt Eleanor?" It became clear that Diane had orchestrated a comprehensive smear campaign, contacting every family member with a fabricated version of events that cast me as the villain. Some relatives believed her story outright, while others reached out seeking my side. "Something doesn't add up," my Uncle Thomas wrote. "Eleanor always spoke so highly of you." These messages provided an opportunity to counter Diane's narrative with truth. I created a simple, factual email explaining the situation and attached copies of legal documents and doctor's statements confirming Grandma's mental clarity. I sent this only to relatives who contacted me directly, refusing to engage in family-wide drama. Another shock came when I received an alert from my bank about someone attempting to access my investment account. The bank representative explained that a man identifying himself as my father had called claiming there was a family emergency requiring immediate funds. Thankfully, the security protocols had prevented any unauthorized access, but it was clear that Diane's financial ambitions extended beyond just taking my house. The situation took an unexpected turn when Tyler, Amber's ex-boyfriend, provided additional information that proved invaluable. Amber told me they were planning to sell the house once they established residency, he revealed. Diane found a developer interested in the property because of its location. This explained their aggressive timeline and destructive renovations. They weren't preparing the house for Amber's baby, but rather stripping it of historic features that might lower its value to developers. With this new information, I asked Mr. Peterson to add potential imminent sale of the property to our emergency filing. We also documented each renovation through the security cameras, creating before and after comparisons to show the destruction of historic elements. The judge granted a temporary order preventing further renovations until ownership was legally determined, but stopped short of evicting them before the hearing. When the court order was served, Diane's response was predictable but still shocking. Lisa's friend who worked at the courthouse reported that Diane had thrown the papers at the server and screamed that no judge is going to tell me what to do in my family's house. Despite this outburst, the order remained in effect, temporarily, halting the destruction of my grandmother's home. The following day, I received an emotionally manipulative voicemail from my father. "Sarah, honey, you need to drop this lawsuit. Diane is very upset, and it's not good for Amber or the baby. We're your family, and families don't sue each other. Can't you see this is tearing us apart?" His failure to acknowledge that stealing my house was what had actually torn us apart showed how completely he'd surrendered his identity to Diane's influence. I didn't return the call. Instead, I focused on preparing for the upcoming hearing. While packing Grandma's personal papers that I'd fortunately stored at my office, I discovered a collection of journals she'd kept during her final years. The entries detailed her clear-minded decision-making process regarding the house, her concerns about Diane's interest in family heirlooms, and most significantly, her observations of how I'd cared for her while maintaining my career. "Sarah has the strength her grandfather and I always admired," she wrote in one entry. "She deserves to carry our home into the future." These journals would provide compelling evidence of her intentions and mental clarity. As the court date approached, Amber escalated her social media campaign, now painting herself as a victim of a heartless relative trying to make a pregnant woman homeless. She shared tearful videos from my grandmother's former bedroom, claiming it was the nursery we might lose because of family betrayal. The comments were filled with outrage on her behalf from people who didn't know she was living in a stolen home. Through it all, I maintained my composure publicly while channeling my hurt and anger into methodical preparation with Mr. Peterson. "They've made critical mistakes," he assured me after our final pre-court meeting. "Their confidence will be their downfall." I nodded, exhausted but determined. I just want my grandmother's house back, and for them to understand they can't take what isn't theirs. Little did they know, the perfect moment for justice was approaching faster than they could imagine. The morning of our first court appearance arrived with a mix of anxiety and determination churning in my stomach. I'd barely slept the night before, going over every document and piece of evidence with Lisa until the early hours. Mr. Peterson had prepared me thoroughly, explaining that this initial hearing would determine temporary possession of the property until the full case could be heard. "First impressions matter with judges," he advised as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Let them see your calm determination, not your anger, justified as it may be." Inside, we were directed to a medium-sized courtroom where several cases would be heard that morning. My father, Diane, and Amber were already seated on the opposite side of the room. Amber had dressed to emphasize her pregnancy, wearing a tight maternity dress that showcased her baby bump, while Diane wore a conservative suit that screamed, "Respectable family woman." My father looked uncomfortable in a tie that seemed to be choking him, his eyes darting around the room but never quite meeting mine. What caught my attention was the young man sitting beside them, frantically flipping through papers. "They found a lawyer at the last minute," Mr. Peterson whispered. "Based on his panic, I'm guessing they didn't give him much preparation time." When our case was called, both parties approached the bench. Judge Carlton, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, regarded us all with practiced neutrality. "I understand," This is a property dispute between family members, she began, reviewing the file before her. Mr. Peterson stepped forward. Your Honor, this is actually a clear case of breaking and entering, property theft, and unlawful occupation. My client, Ms. Mitchell, is the legal owner of the property in question, as clearly established by these documents. He submitted copies of my grandmother's will, the property deed in my name, tax records showing I'd paid property taxes for 2 years, and receipts for major renovations and repairs I'd funded. The judge reviewed them carefully before turning to the other side. And your client's claim to the property is based on what exactly? Their lawyer, still looking underprepared, stood up. Your Honor, my clients believe the deceased was unduly influenced by her granddaughter. They're prepared to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity and manipulation. Judge Carlton's expression remained neutral, but her voice sharpened. Do you have documentation supporting these claims? Medical evaluations? Witness statements from the time the will was executed? The lawyer hesitated. We're in the process of gathering those materials, Your Honor. But in the meantime, my clients have established residence in the family home and are preparing for the arrival of a new child. The judge turned back to Mr. Peterson. Do you have evidence regarding the deceased's mental state at the time the will was executed? Mr. Peterson nodded confidently. Yes, Your Honor. We have statements from Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell's primary physician confirming her mental clarity, the original lawyer who prepared the will, and the witnesses present at the signing, all attesting to her sound decision-making. Capacity. He also submitted Grandma's journals, which the judge set aside to review in chambers. Additionally, Mr. Peterson continued, we have security footage showing the defendants breaking into the property during Ms. Mitchell's absence, on a business trip, changing locks, removing her belongings, and causing property damage. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as Mr. Peterson played a brief clip showing my father, Diane, and a locksmith at my front door, followed by them carrying my belongings out to the lawn. Judge Carlton's expression darkened visibly. Mr. Harrington, she addressed their lawyer. Are your clients aware that breaking and entering is a criminal offense, regardless of family relationships? Before the lawyer could respond, Diane shot to her feet. It's not breaking in when it's a family home. Richard is Eleanor's son. He has more right to that house than she does, she exclaimed, pointing at me. Ms. Mitchell has been removing family, heirlooms, and excluding family members from accessing their rightful property. The judge banged her gavel once. Mrs. Mitchell, you will speak only when addressed by the court. Mr. Harrington, please control your client. The rest of the hearing proceeded with the judge methodically examining the evidence. After reviewing documents from both sides, she delivered her initial ruling. Based on the clear documentation of legal ownership and the troubling evidence of unlawful entry, I am issuing a temporary order restoring possession of the property to Ms. Sarah Mitchell, effective immediately. She fixed my father and Diane with a stern gaze. The defendants are ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours and return all removed property. The court will schedule a full hearing to address the contested will claims, but until that time, the property belongs to the documented legal owner. The judge further ordered an inventory of all items removed from the house and prohibited any additional modifications to the property. As we prepared to leave, I caught my father's eye across the courtroom. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw a flicker of doubt in his expression, a growing realization of the serious legal jeopardy Diane had led him into. Diane was whispering furiously to their lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Outside the courtroom, Mr. Peterson shook my hand. This is just the beginning, but it's a very good start. The judge clearly sees through their claims. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, though I knew we still had battles ahead. What happens now? Now, he said with a slight smile, we prepare for them to either comply with the court order, which I doubt, or give us even more ammunition for the full hearing by defying it. His prediction proved accurate. Rather than complying with the 48-hour vacate order, Diane filed an emergency appeal buying them a few more days in my house. But their legal position was crumbling, and my perfect moment for justice was rapidly approaching. The date for the final hearing arrived after weeks of legal maneuvers by Diane and my father's lawyer. Their emergency appeal had been denied, but they'd managed to secure a full hearing to present their case for contesting Grandma's will. During the intervening time, I'd stayed with Lisa while Mr. Peterson's team gathered additional evidence. The night before the hearing, I could barely sleep, knowing tomorrow would likely determine whether I'd reclaim my grandmother's legacy or lose it forever. "We have everything we need," Mr. Peterson assured me during our final preparation meeting, "and something they don't expect." He opened his laptop and played a video file I hadn't seen before. On screen, my grandmother appeared, seated in her favorite armchair in the living room of the Victorian house. The timestamp showed it was recorded about 6 months before her death, when her health was failing, but her mind remained sharp. "This is Eleanor Mitchell," she began, her voice steady despite her frail appearance. "I'm recording this video to accompany my last will and testament, particularly regarding the disposition of my home." She explained her decision to leave the house to me in detail, citing my care during her illness and her belief that I would preserve the home's history and character. Then came the part that Mr. Peterson had described as our secret weapon. "I feel I must address the possibility that my son Richard or his wife Diane might contest this decision," Grandma continued. "Diane has made numerous inquiries about the value of this house and its contents since marrying Richard. She has suggested several times that I should simplify by selling it and moving to assisted living, with the proceeds going to help their family." Grandma's expression hardened slightly. "I want to state clearly that I am of sound mind, under no undue influence, and this decision is made with full awareness of my family's circumstances. If my will is contested on grounds of mental incapacity or manipulation, I direct my lawyer to submit this video as evidence of my clear intentions and reasoning." The video continued for several minutes as she detailed specific interactions with Diane and my father that had concerned her, as well as her observations of my dedication to maintaining the house and honoring its history. When it ended, I sat in stunned silence. "Grandma knew this might happen," I finally said, wiping away tears. "She was protecting me even then." Mr. Peterson nodded solemnly. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, very perceptive and thorough. We haven't shared this with the opposition. It's our perfect moment to counter their claims of manipulation." The next morning, we arrived at the courthouse to find my father, Diane, and Amber already waiting outside the courtroom. Diane looked confident, whispering to their lawyer while occasionally glancing at me with poorly concealed smugness. Amber had dressed to maximize her pregnant appearance again, this time with what appeared to be a fake contraction, grimacing and holding her belly when she noticed the judge walking past. Most surprising was the stack of moving boxes they'd brought along, placed conspicuously in the hallway. "Are those what I think they are?" I whispered to Mr. Peterson. He nodded grimly. "They're assuming victory and planning to collect more of your belongings today. Their overconfidence works in our favor." When court was called to session, Judge Carlton, who had presided over our previous hearing, reviewed the case file with a frown. "I see the defendants have filed a formal contest to Eleanor Mitchell's will, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. Mr. Harrington, you may present your case." Their lawyer approached the bench with a new confidence that immediately concerned me. "Your Honor, we have gathered significant evidence showing that Eleanor Mitchell was isolated from family during her final years. We have affidavits from several family members stating they were discouraged from visiting by the plaintiff." He submitted several documents that I immediately recognized as coming from distant relatives who had visited only once or twice during Grandma's illness. "Furthermore," he continued, "we have testimony from Richard Mitchell, the deceased son, describing how his daughter took increasing control of Eleanor's finances and decisions in the months before her death." My father avoided my gaze as he was called to testify. Under questioning, he portrayed a distorted version of events, claiming I had inserted myself between him and his mother and manipulated her into changing her will. While clearly uncomfortable with these lies, he maintained the narrative Diane had constructed. When cross-examined by Mr. Peterson about his absence during Grandma's illness, he fumbled, admitting he had visited whenever possible, but acknowledging that his visits had become less frequent after marrying Diane. Mr. Peterson then called, the physician who had cared for my grandmother during her final years. Dr. Reynolds testified to her mental clarity and decisiveness, describing how she had discussed her will and property decisions with him on several occasions. In my professional opinion, he stated firmly, Eleanor Mitchell was of completely sound mind until very near the end of her life, and certainly at the time her will was executed. The most damning testimony came from Mrs. Benson, my neighbor, who described how Diane had pressured her to leave town during my business trip, fabricating a story about a family emergency requiring immediate access to the house. She said Sarah had asked them to check on a water leak, but needed my key since she'd forgotten to leave one with them. She was very insistent, so I gave her my emergency key before leaving to visit my sister. This explained how they had initially gained entry before bringing in the locksmith. By mid-afternoon, both sides had presented their primary evidence, and the judge appeared ready to make her decision. That's when Mr. Peterson played our trump card. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence that directly addresses the claims made by the defendants. With the court's permission, I'd like to present a video recorded by Eleanor Mitchell specifically in anticipation of a will contest. Judge Carlton's eyebrows raised slightly as she granted permission. The courtroom fell silent as the video began playing on the courtroom's monitor. I couldn't look at the screen, having seen it already. Instead, I watched my father's face as he heard his mother's voice. The color drained from his cheeks as Grandma methodically dismantled every claim they had made, providing specific dates and details of Diane's inquiries about the house's value and attempts to convince her to sell it. When Grandma mentioned how I'd taken a leave of absence from work to care for her after a hospitalization, tears streamed down my father's face. Diane's reaction was starkly different. Her expression hardened, jaw clenched in barely suppressed fury as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. By the time the video ended, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Carlton removed her glasses, taking a moment before speaking. In light of this extremely clear evidence of Eleanor Mitchell's intentions and mental state, I am denying the contest to the will. The property and all contents legally belong to Sarah Mitchell as specified in the will. She then addressed the breaking and entering charges, ruling that my father and Diane must vacate the property immediately, return all removed items, and pay restitution for damages. Furthermore, she added, fixing them with a stern gaze, I'm referring the breaking and entering and property destruction evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. The perfect moment I had been waiting for had arrived. As the judge issued her ruling, I felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for my grandmother, whose wisdom had reached beyond her lifetime to protect what she valued. Diane's furious whispers to their lawyer were cut short when the judge issued one final statement. And Mrs. Mitchell, she addressed Diane directly, the court takes a very dim view of the fabricated evidence and false statements you've presented. Should the district attorney pursue charges, this court will provide all relevant transcripts. As we prepared to leave, I approached my father, who stood alone while Diane argued with their lawyer. Dad, I said quietly, Grandma would have forgiven you. I hope someday I can too. His broken expression told me more than words could about the realization that had finally dawned on him. The process of reclaiming my home began the very next morning. A sheriff's deputy accompanied me to oversee the removal of my father, Diane, and Amber from the property. The scene was tense but controlled, with Diane maintaining a frigid silence, while Amber dramatically sobbed about being thrown out on the street. My father moved methodically. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he carried their hastily packed belongings to their vehicles. The most difficult moment came when I entered the house for the first time in weeks. The changes they had made were jarring and heartbreaking. Grandma's carefully preserved vintage wallpaper in the entryway had been painted over with a generic gray. The handcrafted banisters had been replaced with modern metal railings. In the kitchen, they had begun demolishing the original cabinetry to make way for contemporary units that still sat in boxes. Each alteration felt like a personal attack, an attempt to erase the history and character that made the house special. After they departed under the deputy's supervision, I walked alone through each room, assessing the damage and making notes about what could be restored and what had been permanently lost. The nursery they had begun creating in what had been Grandma's bedroom was particularly painful to see. They had removed her antique four-poster bed and replaced it with a modern crib and changing table. The walls, once a soft rose color she had loved, were now painted a garish yellow with cartoon animals stenciled around the borders. As I sat on the window seat that thankfully remained untouched, tears flowed freely for the first time since this ordeal began. I mourned not just for the physical changes to the house, but for the family relationships that had been irreparably damaged. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Friends rallied around me, helping catalog the damage for insurance claims and beginning the process of restoring what could be saved. Lisa organized a cleaning crew to remove the half-finished renovations, while my colleague Marcus, an amateur woodworker, offered to help recreate some of the damaged original features. The community support was overwhelming and unexpected. Neighbors, who had witnessed the confrontation on my lawn, brought meals and offered assistance. Mrs. Chen, who had recorded the original confrontation, helped me track down some of my belongings that Diane had sold online. Even my boss showed up with several employees from the marketing firm, dedicating a Saturday to helping strip the paint from Grandma's built-in bookshelves that Diane had painted white. Amid this activity, I received a text message from my father, asking if he could stop by alone. After considerable thought, I agreed, setting clear boundaries about the visit's purpose and duration. When he arrived, the confident man I had known all my life was nowhere to be seen. In his place stood someone who seemed to have aged a decade in a few weeks. "I came to apologize," he said simply as we sat on the front porch. The same porch where Grandma had taught me to identify constellations on summer nights. "There's no excuse for what I did. I betrayed you, and I betrayed Mom." The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. He explained how Diane had gradually isolated him from friends and family, creating a dynamic where her approval became his primary concern. "I lost myself," he admitted. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped being your father and became her puppet." While his explanation helped me understand, it didn't erase the hurt. "I appreciate your apology," I told him honestly, "but trust takes time to rebuild. I need space right now." He nodded, accepting this boundary. For what it's worth, Diane and I are separating. The court case made me see who she really is and what I've become by enabling her. As he left, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps someday we might rebuild some version of our relationship, though it would never be the same. In the following months, I threw myself into restoring the house. Some features were gone forever, but many could be reclaimed or reimagined in ways that honored Grandma's vision. I sought out artisans who specialized in historic homes, found vintage materials that matched the original construction, and slowly, room by room, breathed life back into the old Victorian. Along the way, I discovered hidden aspects of the house I'd never noticed before. A secret drawer in the dining room buffet containing Grandma's handwritten recipe cards, initials carved into the attic beams by previous generations, a collection of vintage photographs tucked into a wall cavity during a previous renovation. Each discovery felt like a gift from Grandma, reminding me why this place mattered so much. 6 months after reclaiming my home, I hosted a gathering for everyone who had helped during the ordeal. The house was still a work in progress, but the essential character had been restored. Lisa, who had given me shelter during my darkest days, brought her new boyfriend. Mrs. Benson brought her famous apple pie. My colleagues from work marveled at the transformation from the photos they had seen of the damage. As I looked around at these people who had become my chosen family, I realized that this painful experience had taught me invaluable lessons about standing up for myself, recognizing who truly had my best interests at heart, and honoring commitments to those we love. Grandma Eleanor had entrusted me with her home because she knew I would fight for it, just as she would have done. In the quiet moments after everyone had left, I sat in Grandma's restored garden under the stars, feeling her presence more strongly than I had since her passing. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "Your home is safe." The journey had been painful, but I emerged stronger, with clearer boundaries and a deeper appreciation for the legacy I had been entrusted to protect. It wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about honoring a promise and creating new memories in a home that would now carry both our stories forward. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought so hard for your inheritance, or might you have chosen a different path? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've experienced family betrayal, know that healing is possible, even when the path forward looks uncertain. If you found my story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can lead to victory, even against those who should have been in your corner. Thank you for walking this journey with me, and may your own homes always be filled with genuine love and respect.